Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's selection comes at us from a Czech guy. This is another Blue Efekt song, Za krokem žen, which translates to After the Women's Step, from 1979. The lyrics don't hold up that much anymore, IMO, but it's mainly about the instrumental parts. That's why I chose it. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We've had them on the channel a couple of times, and I believe I've enjoyed them. Let's dive into this one and see what's going on. Interesting production on it, but I really like that rhythm. Some of the intervals they're using, and of course the sound of our synth or organ off to the side. Very appropriate for the October month. Interesting decision. A massive change of emotional pace here. Nice bass line controlling a lot of the chordal ideas on the bottom. It's been a really interesting ride of tension. Like the melody line here is so divorced from everything else we've listened to. If it wasn't for this one chord, I'd say that the entire section is a bit divorced from everything we've heard up to this point. I think I'm going to test something later on. I'm going to play this through my speakers and see if the experience is different. Because the very harsh vocal panning, it doesn't sound fantastic in headphones. It's fine, it's just a little odd. Cool little effect over there. Even with those passing ideas, they never really hit center. They're on the right side and then they're on the left. Something to do with the older technology, I think. Again though, some eeriness, tons of tension. This is the de facto mode of the song. It's really interesting when they deviate from this to explore more levity in ways that isn't just released from the tension, but altogether more positive, like the sun breaks through. I love the balancing here between the synth, or the organ, the bass, and the guitar. They all have their own roles to fill and they're so important. Very interesting technique on the guitar too. Ah, okay. This section right here is solid, but it kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm honestly wondering where it's going. Yeah, like, it's just so different from where we were. The emotional whiplash on this song is something else entirely. This is going to be a really interesting conversation on transitions, I think. What is that tone over there? I love it. It's a very powerful, percussive, shimmery, picked instrument of some sort. And the fade out. Okay. Yeah, just a fascinating song. Just a quick overview of my subjective feelings regarding this track is that many of the sections I thought were really well crafted. I love the way they sound. The production on them is nice. Clarity of instruments, strong direction, great atmosphere, really nice chord progressions, and no intervals utilized to help differentiate many of the sections. And, what I'm getting at is that if you take all of the disparate sections together here and make them isolated ideas, I think they're all really solid. I groove with a lot of them. I just have a really tough time hearing them as a single concept. And I think that's where most of my criticism is going to lie today. And honestly, the more that you all have me listening to classic prog rock, the more I find this is a common criticism for a lot of the genre and sort of the era as well. There's just a lot of music from that time period, the late 60s and the 70s, and even a little bit of the earlier 80s that were still on the tail end of some of that. A lot of the early bands used harsh transitions into completely different ideas, and that set the stage. I mean, that's what people liked. You listen to, one of the early prog uh, monsters. The early prog bands that just dominated the scene, and that's what they did, and it was mind blowing, and people loved it. And so when the new bands came up who were inspired by your King Crimsons, your Genesises, your Yeses, they emulated that and they ran with that as well. And it's just something I'm not a real big fan of, but there's a lot of music of the time that does it. And this right here it's more of that. There's a lot of disparate ideas in here that are just smashed together. And I don't know if I would necessarily say I butt heads in the comment section regarding it, but it's quite clear that the fans of this type of composition uh, really enjoy it and they find it exceptionally progressive. Um, and some of them are a little less than kind in talking about me regarding it, but that's fine. I'd prefer some better fruitful conversations without name calling, but it's such a small amount of the comments, it really doesn't concern me too much. What I'm getting at though is people really like this. It's just like there's like 80 different styles in here. Don't you love that? And like I don't personally, not unless they all came together and meant something. And usually, at least for a first time listen, it's really difficult for me to find that connection. If it even exists. Sometimes, like I mentioned, this is just how music was made at the time. This was part of the progressive element, was just putting a bunch of things together in one song. Um, sometimes I find it a bit more cohesive. I find the threads that tie all the disparate parts together, and sometimes I don't. And I don't know that I'm going to find that here. So I don't know if I really want to dig into that criticism too much. It's a topic I've touched on a lot in the past, but I do want to make that clear here. As much as I really enjoyed most of this in isolation, I do have a lot of trouble hearing it together as a single unified concept rather than a bunch of movements in a larger idea. But man, even when it comes to like classical music and movements, they tend to have something that ties them all together. And this song just willy nilly jumps between emotions, atmospheres, chord progressions, modes. I mean, it is so scatterbrained in what it's trying to present. And I think unless the lyrics are going to go into that sort of scatterbrained stream of consciousness, anything in those themes, I'm going to find that I don't have as strong of an artistic appreciation for it as some of you may have uh, for this track. Now, one thing that they do very well is lean into specific vibes. Right from the start, we have eeriness, we have tension. It's the song feels like it crushes in on you. Actually, I'd mentioned, I think it was the first two notes. I was like, this production is interesting. Have you ever felt really small in a place? I think the first time as an adult this happened to me was when I went to New York City. And I've been to larger cities. I've seen skyscrapers, but there's something about the sheer plethora of building that is in New York City that I don't know. It's a scope I hadn't felt before. It made me feel really small. That's kind of like what this song made me feel right from the start. The synth or the organ, I'm still not sure. I probably should just start calling it an organ because that's probably more accurate. And the guitar both come in from the start and they are just really big sounds. They take up the entirety of their sides that they're assigned to. The bass punches in through the middle and it is another very large sound. I felt like a toy against these monstrous tones, just skyscraper tones. And so the beginning of this track feels haunting to me. It almost makes me feel tense, scared, maybe. The eeriness, the palpability of that they explore through the atmosphere, the note intervals that they utilize, the specific kinds of tension that they get out of the harmonic constructs, everything feels horror based. We explore a few sections like this, all dealing with various types of tension and eeriness, especially given the tones of the organ. Has a very Phantom of the Opera-esque vibe to it through majority of this track. They are fantastic at leaning into this, even in some of the more stable sections of the song. Like early on, when I had mentioned that first time we really deviated from this eerie tension and moved to something brighter, that second chord in the 3 chord progression, with the third chord existing for 2 bars, so it still is a 4 bar chord. We have chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, and 3, and then back to 1. That second chord still has that bite, it has that tension. They're just really good at leaning into that, and the resolution out of that sounds great in the section as well. um, but all throughout this track you can feel this tension, this eeriness, this something not so normal right beyond your periphery. It's everywhere in this track, and I love that feeling. The way that they accomplish it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, I just really love being tense all the time. But I love the way that they accomplish it. I think that they're masters at finding this feeling, this interval, even in more stable chord progressions. Even in more stable chords, they can still find a way to sneak this dissonance, this tension into a chord. They do a really great job of utilizing it throughout the entire song, whether a section is leaning predominantly on this tension or not. And as I had mentioned just now, I didn't really mean to move into it already, but we do step outside of this tension occasionally. The first time being that I want to call it the chorus, because we do revisit it a second time somewhere in the middle of the track, and we do hear it right before our outro. I think it was either the second or third to last section. But we did come back to it after a rather lengthy rhapsody in the middle of the song. Um, and it has this levity to it, this brightness. It's like I mentioned, it's like the sun peeking out past clouds on a dreary day. It's a little bit of hope, but it's not completely positive, bright pop music kind of stuff. It still has a tinge of the darkness, and that second chord makes sure you feel the weight sometimes. You're not free from the tension, it just isn't always present. And they play around with this, as I mentioned, with a variety of effectiveness throughout the entire track. Sometimes it's full on tension, sometimes it's half tension, sometimes it's only tense sometimes of your chord progression. Um, and it really gives the entire song a creeping feel to it. As I mentioned, you're never really safe from it. I think the bluesy rock and roll section we went into was probably the least tense moment of the track, and it also feels the most divisive, the least connected to anything else. It was our final part of the rhapsody before returning back to some of the ideas we started the track on. We'll get to that later, though. Um, you're never really free from the tension, and that's, well, depending what the lyrics are, I think it'll be a really nice idea, because it's always kind of snuck in there. And I think most people listening to the track will always feel it, even if they don't know why. Even in the more positive parts, you're like, something still feels a little off here. Still feel a little claustrophobic. Yeah, they don't let it go. And I love that. They are fans of extended writing. That's the only way I can describe it. Before we hit our first set of lyrics, I think we listened to like 3.5 minutes worth of music across 3 or 4 different styles, or sections at least. They're never really fond with just progressing the song. It always has to do something different, has to explore a new concept, a new atmosphere. I don't know if I should make this comment without having read the lyrics yet, but on a purely only listen to the song one time, only know the musical components of it, I want to say that there is a focused, razor honed version of this song somewhere in this 12-minute runtime. You cut off the fat, you slim it down, you focus on the storytelling, and you can probably come out the other side with a very sharp 6-minute track. Now, I'm not saying it would be better than this, and for all I know, it would completely screw up the artistic intent of it. It might even screw up the thematic intent of it. But there's just a lot of sections that seem to be divergent for divergency's sake. And the intro is definitely part of that. I think at the beat, when I was listening to it during the reaction, I was like, okay, this is cool, and this is cool, and this is cool. But by the end of the song, in retrospect, it sort of just is a bunch of starts. And in retrospect, it feels like a bunch of false starts. Where the song, they wrote 4 intros and didn't want to have to put any on the cutting room floor, so put all 4 in. None of them really flow into one another. None of them really complement one another, and any one of them could have gone into that first vocal section, and yet we have all of them. Like I said, I'm still not sure if that's the statement I want to make without knowing everything about the song first. But y'all come here for my reactions, listen to something one time and hear my thoughts. And that is a thought I had when the track was over, is that there's a lot of fat left on this meat. And the intro is definitely a big point where I think some could be cut off. But that kind of runs true for a lot of this too. In fact, the entire middle section of this track, somewhere between minutes 5.5 to 9 or 10, is just a series of disparate ideas that I find have very little to do with one another. And much like our intro, any one of them could have been a bridge. Any one of them could have moved back into that third chorus. I don't know if it is a chorus, it still feels chorusy to me, and it is a part, it is probably the only part in the song we repeat. So I'm calling it the chorus. Any one of them could have moved into it. And instead we have all of them. And none of them really complement each other. Some of them do. Some of them complement way back further into the track, almost like callbacks or variations on older ideas. But as a string of ideas here in the middle, they're all sort of just are. It almost feels like they're filling up time. Until one of them ends up moving us back to the chorus to take us to the outro of the song. Again, it feels like one of them should have been picked, maybe 2 at most, and found a way to string them together. Maybe pick the 2 that are most cohesive and utilize them instead. Not saying it'd be a better song, but I think it would be a more focused song, and that might not be what they were aiming for. Everything in here sounds great, though. The bass, lovely bass lines, beautiful tone. The guitar, not only does the guitar sound good in all of its sounds, there's a lot of guitar tones going on, but it also has some really interesting ornamental or sound effects based tones that they use. Very interesting stuff. I love just the general timbre work on this song. There's a lot of sections. Each of them sort of has their own sonic identity, which doesn't help at all with it feeling cohesive, but it does create a lot of dynamics in the timbre area. And so we end up hearing the guitar and the organ in a variety of different ways. And I really love that dynamic quality there. Um, and speaking of the org, it just sounds crisp. I mean, even bringing in the production here, there's some aspects that I feel are a bit older as far as production choice goes. Placement of instruments, I'd even say the width of instruments, some of the overall texture, the way that the song just feels in general. It feels like a dated song. I would say that the production here definitely gives away its age. But at the same time, there's also a lot of really great production choices on more minute levels, such as how the instruments sound, and where they're placed, and the very little use of panning in here that I thought was really nice, or dynamic panning, I should say, moving an idea from one side to the other. Um, it just sounds good. It sounds clear. There's a crispness to everything, and the variety of sounds throughout is a pleasure to listen to as well. Now, there is a vast density to this track. I'm not going to get everything on a first time listen. There's probably a lot of stuff that I've missed that you may even find to be the most important part of the track, and I've just glossed over it, or maybe I haven't even brought it up at all. I've only listened to the track once, and there's a lot to it. But the one thing that I do want to point out, the one thing I want to talk about, I mentioned earlier I would, is the bluesy hard rock section. I'm really curious. Everything else feels 70s prog. And I was trying to pinpoint specifically the vocal style, the production style, the way melodies are written and phrased. There's something here, and I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of elements in this track where I'm like, this sounds like something else. And I couldn't ever pinpoint the band. And I think that's when it dawned on me that this is sort of just an amalgamation of 70s prog rock. A lot of this feels very um, iterative as far as the minute details of prog rock. If you listen to the way that melodies are formed in some of the biggest hits when you think of classic prog, the melodies are formed here in a similar way. When you listen to the transitions between ideas, the melodies here formed in, the transitions are formed in a similar way. There's a lot of a lot of components here that compositionally date it to this period. Um, except that bluesy hard rock section. They went a completely different route. They changed up, once again, the timbre of everything. We have a very electric buzzsaw kind of tone on the guitar. It takes lead. It's primarily focused on shredding and playing quickly rather than building atmosphere or ornamental ideas, which is what it's been doing the entire song. Harmonically, it's pushing more towards a bluesier sound rather than an atmospheric sound, rather than a tense sound. Um, it's going for a bit of a darkness rather than a weight. And the speed creates a type of lightness to it, a featheriness to the performance, to the song that the rest of the track doesn't have. This whole section stands out massively, and there's no lyrics during it. There's no lyrics that come before it. There's nothing to really point to what it's doing or why it's doing it other than the music. And as I've said, the music to me is just a giant smorgasbord of ideas. It is, I was going to say a charcuterie board, but like if it wasn't just meats and cheese. Like if there's cereal on it in some places, and you're like, "Hey, who put the cereal on the meat cheese board?" And then there's like, I don't know, M&Ms on it too, and you're like, it's not bad. I enjoy all this in isolation, but they don't belong on a charcuterie board. And that's sort of how this section feels to me. It is very well done. I'm not cutting down the composition or the performance. The section itself in isolation is beautiful, and I loved it. The way that it brought groove in, the way that it brought these bluesy vibes in. it just doesn't seem to fit with anything else in the slightest. And I'm so confused about its presence in this track, at least with everything else. As divorced as they were, they all sort of stuck with a general vibe and sound. They might have ventured off on their own path, but I could clearly see how that branch was still connected to the same trunk. This branch is part of another tree that's just grown so far that it's in the picture of this tree. I don't understand how it got here. Um, I'm looking forward to the lyrics, but like I said, nothing is sung there or before there for like 4 sections. So I don't think I'm going to find anything in the lyrics that are going to point to why this was included. The last thing I want to talk about, which, I mean, this video is already running quite on a bit. I mentioned that we're going to have a really interesting conversation on transition. And this kind of ties into the topic I said I wasn't going to bring up again, but I think this is an interesting topic here. A lot of the times I bring up the idea of transitions creating frictionless composition. A lot of metal bands like to utilize harsh stops or just smashing two ideas together and doing one thing one bar and another the next, and you're just forced to roll with that punch. We've changed gears entirely, catch up with us kind of vibe. And I find that to be a bit disruptive at times, depending on how abrasive the shifts are. And you give me stuff like Car Bomb and Early Between the Buried and Me, and I'm going to have a really tough time keeping up with the song and finding enjoyment in it. But it's primarily the transition itself that is my issue. When we look at this track, the transitions are mostly smooth. There's some really beautiful ways of moving between two ideas, utilizing foreshadowing, callbacks, fade in and fade out, which is a bit more of a cliched idea, but it is a smooth movement, at least smoother than no fading at all and just stopping what you're doing and changing the ways entirely. Almost every movement from one style to the next on this track is done so in a way that is a natural type of flow. And I really appreciate that. And from that perspective alone, it would think that this song is very fluid and cohesive because the transitions are well done. But I find it's really interesting that while the transitions are fluid, the song is still cut up, it's still choppy, and it's because of the sections themselves being so distinct. So this is sort of the opposite of traditional metal, where the musical ideas are typically very cohesive. They just have these really harsh transitions. This has smooth transitions and very different sections to them, and it's two sides of the same coin, I suppose, both of them creating a bit of friction for me in the pacing and flow of the songs, but for two totally different but parallel reasons. I'm going to hit the lyrics, even though I know the requester said that they don't really hold up and that they were mostly interested in my thoughts on the music itself, but it's not really complete without looking at the lyrics, so I do want to check that out real quick, even if it ends up being a fruitless endeavor. All right. To wrap this up, the track is lyrically about something. The translation is very rough on both DeepL and Google Translate. I couldn't find a hand translated version of this. Uh, it it seems to be about maybe not necessarily a man and a woman, but the concept of man and woman. Um, the woman is continuously spoken about as a blossoming flower, and the man is consistently looking for Luna. Could be the end, could be quite particularly the moon. By the end of it, though, he is always on a search to find this person, and the woman is always in pain. It says that her palms are a white flower, and when embraced, it blossoms with painful hope. It says that she knows fullness of joy, but also the depths of blackness as meadow or pond. So we have somebody who is searching and somebody who is waiting to be found. But there's this little twist at the end, which I think is where the requester said that the lyrics haven't aged too well. It could be specific to this woman, but given that I also get the vibe of generally speaking of man and woman throughout this track, it says that behind the step of every woman is a sound, like a secret, a confession, that to a man is what the sun is to the reaper. When the man finds it, he says quietly, I am awake, I am loved, I am found. I don't quite know what all of it's supposed to mean. The translation is a bit rough, and I've paraphrased most of this in order to create something that has a bit more fluidity of thought to it. Uh, so I'm just gonna move on, I suppose. There's nothing in here that I can even tangentially relate to how I felt about the music, so I don't know that it's worthwhile going down this very literal translation route. If anybody has a more natural translation of it, I'm open to reading it. And as usual, if you have your own interpretation of it, please let me know down in the comments. Also, give me your thoughts, opinions, and perspectives on the music. I know I had a bit of criticism for it, but if you really enjoy every aspect of it, please let me know. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.